Look for America, we usually look towards Aaron Renn of the Manhattan Institute City Journal. Aaron Renn, good morning. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network with Colonel Mike. Thank you for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me back on there, Colonel Mike.
Good to talk to you. We just had Orrin Cass from the City Journal on talking about education. And
oh, yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, he is. He really is. And I haven't had you on in a while. I haven't been at the studio in months. I don't know. I think John said I have bad breath or something. I don't know what it was. But I wanted to talk about, you have two articles. I'm going to keep you on two segments today for the end of the year shows. One is Midwestern Breakout, and the other one we're going to talk about Kokomo. So let's talk about the Midwestern Breakout. Columbus, Ohio is firing on all cylinders. So tell us what's going on.
Well, Columbus, Ohio, it's the state capital of Ohio. It is also where the state's biggest kind of flagship university, Ohio State University, is. All with Columbus. It's probably because of Ohio State football. And it's a city that had been under the radar for most of Ohio's history. Mm-hmm. If you think about cities in Ohio, you're much more likely to think about a place like Cleveland, Cincinnati, or even Dayton or Akron or Toledo. The names just are much more familiar than Columbus. Mm-hmm. In fact, I always say Columbus is the largest city in America, that you always have to say Columbus, Ohio, to distinguish it probably from the Columbus in your own state, like a Columbus, Georgia, or a Columbus, Indiana. Mm-hmm. But today, it's a region of over 2 million people, and in a state that has really struggled economically. I mean, one of the worst, economic struggles of any of the traditional manufacturing states. Columbus has really become a big success story, and while it's not quite growing as fast as an Austin, Texas, or a Nashville, or a Charlotte, it's doing very well in terms of population and job growth, and so it's a success story in a region that hasn't had a lot of them.
So it's created nearly 164,000 new jobs at 17% growth rate.
Yeah, so they've added a lot. They've added a lot of jobs. And, it was kind of interesting. They set out. I think they said they wanted to create 150,000 new jobs, and during the 2000s, which was a very rough decade, nationally, they called it the lost decade. I think it was maybe Rahm Emanuel who coined that term. Mm-hmm. Columbus region lost jobs during the 2000s. And then to say, well, we're going to add 150,000 jobs when in the last 10 you'd actually lost jobs, that was a pretty lofty goal, but the economy certainly helped them. We've had a long economic expansion, and, of course, very recently it's been doing great in some ways. Great for Columbus, at least, and it's managed to exceed the job numbers they set out for themselves.
So what are the jobs that are coming, or what are the jobs that are there in Columbus now? What kind of jobs? What kind of businesses?
Well, there are a variety of jobs, and this is one of the things that distinguishes a place like Columbus from, say, in New York City or San Francisco. They're adding a lot of jobs in those places, but they're exclusively super high-end jobs. Mm-hmm. So there are high-end jobs in Columbus. There are over 20,000 employees at J.P. Morgan Chase. A lot of the back office is there, so it's a big banking and insurance center. Nationwide Insurance is there. Mm-hmm. They've also had some success in their technology industries. There's a company there called Cover My Meds, which basically does work in, obviously, pharmaceutical insurance space. It was just bought out for over $1 billion.
Wow.
So they have white-collar business there that's doing pretty well, but they're also a gigantic distribution hub. That because of where they're located, they can, I don't remember the exact percentage, but they can reach almost a gigantic percentage of the U.S. Population in an 8-hour drive.
25%. It's probably 25% of the
something like that.
Northeast. Yeah.
So they're capable. They can get to New York City in a single day with a truck, which if you go even to Indianapolis, which is 3 hours west, because of the DOT regulations that were put in place, you can't drive straight through, basically. Right. So they're in an ideal spot geographically for distribution. So there's a ton of distribution business there. Honda has a big auto plant just northwest of the city. So there's a variety of industries there. There's no one thing that sort of jumps out. And so there's higher end businesses and there's starter jobs. So this is a good story, I think.
Tell me, when you were visiting Columbus, what was Williamsburg about it? What was Brooklyn about it?
Well, Columbus really isn't that kind of a city. When you go there, it's mostly like a lot of Midwestern industrial cities. It's mostly sort of wood frame, single-family homes throughout most of the city. There is a corridor that runs from their downtown north to the university. It's about a 3-mile stretch of road on High Street, which is their main street, North-South Street, that is built out with essentially traditional storefront, retail, apartments, etc. That's booming. There are thousands of apartments going up inside the city, and of course there are coffee shops and there are microbreweries, and there are all kinds of fancy pickle shops and things like that. The typical sort of Williamsburg type stuff. But that's not really what makes the city go. It's more of a traditional, I think, suburban type environment, much more so than the urban one. As much as their city boosters might not like to talk about that.
So the downtown is it's not the big attraction. It's just suburban with a downtown.
Yeah, it has some historic neighborhoods in the city, but most of the employment base is out in essentially office parks around the perimeter. It's not like it's not like a downtown Chicago or a Manhattan, or San Francisco or a Boston or a DC that just have these gigantic employment centers in the core that's just sucking in all the jobs, while maybe even some of their suburbs even die in some cases. They're demolishing office parks in Connecticut, for example, because suburban Connecticut office market's just not competitive. In Columbus, the suburban market's competitive. The downtown is doing okay, but that's not really the secret sauce of the economy. I do think they have some quality urban spaces. I don't want to take that away from them, but they're not really competing. To me, they're not a place that's competing with a Brooklyn directly. They are much more of a high quality city on kind of a Nashville or an Austin model.
Aaron, on the downtown, would you say is there some, let's say, architecture on the scale of like a Cleveland, the old style, some nice downtown buildings like brownstone kind of stuff?
There's the best neighborhood is actually not in the downtown. There's a neighborhood called German Village. That's one of the best historic districts in the United States. It's got a lot of old brick homes, and it was a German neighborhood, and there are a ton of German-style buildings and old German-style businesses. It's just really a fantastic tree-lined streets, one of America's great historic districts. There's another one on the north side called Victorian Village, I believe, that's also very nice. The downtown has a few kind of older historic buildings like most places do, but again, Columbus was a very small city back when Cleveland was building those old pre-war office buildings. So Columbus doesn't have as many of those. Gotcha. Cleveland was a gigantic city in America in the early part of the 20th century. And so it built a lot of things that Columbus doesn't have. That is one of the things that maybe Columbus is weaker. For example, Cleveland's got Cleveland Orchestras, one of the premier orchestras in the world, not just the country. Their museum is spectacular. A lot of the cultural institutions in Cleveland and Cincinnati are far better regarded than the ones in Columbus, and that's partially because Columbus was just a small town, 50 years ago, but 100 years ago, compared to these, really, really booming, wealthy metropolises elsewhere in the state.
What is the age moving into the area? What are they? What do you call them? Millennials?
Millennials. There are a lot of millennials. They are essentially, now this is the one I would say a little bit of the flip side of the Columbus story is I do think there's a linkage between the decline of the rest of the state and the rise of Columbus. So a lot of the young, educated people from the rest of Ohio have essentially moved to Columbus, especially coming from the north and northeast. They're coming there because it seems to be the hip and happening place in Ohio. So they really have been drawing in a lot of that, college grad up through mid-30s educated demographic that other places have, but it's mostly coming from elsewhere in Ohio. This is one of the, I think, maybe the Achilles heel that they need to fix in Columbus is they're drawing people from Ohio like crazy, but they don't have a great draw nationally. That's different from, say, a Nashville or an Austin or a Charlotte, which are drawing from all over the place. So if Columbus really wants to go to the next level and become more of a national story instead of a state or regional story, they need to figure out how to get people from California, people from the Northeast, et cetera, to move there.
Wow. That's an interesting piece. I think I went through there once in my lifetime, driving somewhere. I think we crossed from Wheeling, which is about maybe 100 miles east, Wheeling, West Virginia. Yeah. So I think, on
I-70 there.
Yeah, years ago I think we went through there. And Wheeling also, eventually they're going to come around, but they have some great, real old historic buildings. I remember back then. They have a great old bridge. Everybody takes tremendous pictures. You have these artists there on the river.
Yeah, they're right on the river.
Yeah, it's a great city. Great city with this little island. Well, and they have a young mayor that basically brought the place back from the brink. He was in Washington for a while. I think he's in his 30s. And he went back there, and it's gentrifying. And again, it's pulling from other parts of the state, too. A lot of young families. It's like the Pittsburgh conversation, going back to grandmas, having the aunts and uncles in the community. And
that's what you find in a lot of these sort of states that have struggled is there tends to be at least one, but usually not that many. There could be more, but usually not that many. Often just one kind of place that's really booming that everybody's going to. So in Indiana, they're going to Indianapolis. In Illinois, they're going into downtown Chicago. So there's limited numbers of places that are doing well in some of these states, and so I think that the challenge is for those places is you can't just suck in people from the rest of the state. That can help get you going, but I do believe that we need to care about everybody, and so the idea that like my town's doing well, but the rest of the state is going down the tubes, that's not a recipe for sustainable success. If you don't bring other people along with you, then ultimately, if the state fails, it's going to kind of drag drag everybody else down. So I don't like the idea of celebrating just one success and not thinking about everyone else as well. So that's something for them to keep in mind. They have to bring the rest of the states along with them, not just try to pretend like they're the only thing that matters there.
What kind of government is in Columbus, and what's the economic development people like?
Yeah, I would say Columbus is it's a fairly large city. Like most cities, it has Democrats basically run it from the Democratic Party, but it's really had a very pro-business environment at the state level. They've had it's kind of tilted back and forth, but it seems to be going more into the red column. So it's relatively solid state policies there, and very, very business driven. So the limited companies, the Victoria's Secret and all that are based there. So there's a local billionaire who founded that, Les Wexner, and many other of the premier businessmen in town have essentially pumped a lot of money back into the city. Wow. And they've helped ensure that it stays very business friendly. But it is sort of a top down. It is sort of a top down model more so than a bottom up model. So some might critique that, but I would say it's been pretty business friendly Democrats there. Super.
Yes, this is a great story. It's a nice story. I like hearing these stories. That's why I love reading your stuff and having you on, and bringing another view to the listeners. Some culture besides politics to the show, because the show is all about politics, really.
Right.
And it's good to know, because really, as far as economics, it has a lot to do with politics, too, on a state level or city level, So we're going to keep you on, Aaron, for another segment, and we're going to have this story about Kokomo, Indiana. So if you just hang on, we're going to do a couple of commercials, go to the news, and we'll be back with you, okay? Thank you so much.
Great. Looking forward to it.